Today, Kiwi Bank sold to Kiwis again. Hi again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, Web Notice Posts covering finance and problem news with a distinctively Australian flavour. I recently discussed the creation of Kiwi Bank, a national bank in New Zealand, with one of its architects, the Hon Matt Robson. Kiwi Bank was set up 20 years ago at the behest of the late left-wing politician Jim Anderton, who believed the country should have its own national bank. And it now has more than 1 million customers, but remains a minnow compared to its big four Australian rivals, ASB, ANZ and Westpac. Home loans are Kiwi Bank's biggest business, where it has a market share of somewhere between 6.5% and 7%. It doesn't have the skill or capacity to handle accounts for larger businesses, the government or the agri sector. And it has a 2 to 4% share of the business market, which is mostly home loans secured against a business owner's residence. Kiwi Bank recently posted a record profit, but it was still less than 1/10 of the ASB profit posted just a few days earlier. But now it's just been announced by the Minister of Finance, Hon Robson, that the government is borrowing $2.1 billion to buy Kiwi Bank's parent company to keep the bank in Kiwi ownership, after two of its existing Crown-owned shareholders wanted out. The Crown will take over Kiwi Group Holdings, which owns Kiwi Bank and NZ Home Loans, under an agreement that allowed the shareholders to sell their shares to each other or the Crown from October the 31st last year. ACC, which owns 25%, and NZ Post, which owns 53%, wanted to exit their investments. The NZ Super Fund, which owned the remaining 22%, was interested in buying some or all of NZ Post's stake, but wanted the flexibility to bring in private capital and have the option to sell to private investors in the future, which the government rejected as it wanted to ensure Kiwi ownership. The government said it did so to make sure Kiwi Bank remains fully New Zealand owned. So the move thwarts any attempts by the NZ Super Fund to acquire all of the bank and then restructure it. Robertson said Kiwi Bank had done well to grow from a standing start to where it is now, noting the big four Australian banks come with an awful lot behind them. These owners took over when the previous national government was unwilling to provide capital directly to Kiwi Bank, but at the time of that deal the government retained a right of first refusal over any subsequent sale. The KGH purchase is valued at $2.1 billion, and the Minister of Finance said that the money would come from previously announced borrowing, but the fiscal impact is expected to be diminished by horizontal transfers from one Crown account to another. In buying KGH, Robertson made clear his aim was to prevent the bank from disappearing into overseas ownership. While the Crown essentially owned KGH through Crown-owned entities, an ongoing shareholding in Kiwi Bank did not fit NZ Post's and ACC's long-term strategic and investment plans, he said. NZ Super Fund had been interested in purchasing a majority holding in KGH, but withdrew its interest as it did not align with the government's commitment to public and New Zealand ownership. The Super Fund was widely believed to be frustrated at having its hands tied in regard to its KGH holdings, since it could profit solely from Kiwi Bank's dividends, not from asset sales. KGH earlier sold its Kiwi Saver and insurance arms, and it retains its mortgage company New Zealand Home Loans. Robertson said this all sets up Kiwi Bank strongly for future growth. The new ownership structure simplifies our ability to fully support Kiwi Bank to meet its future potential. The transaction is subject to regulatory approval by the Reserve Bank. With Kiwi Bank staying in New Zealand hands, New Zealanders can continue to bank with a trusted, credible and competitive banking option that will remain fully locally owned. Kiwi ownership of Kiwi Bank is a bottom line for this government, and not one that the government was prepared to put at risk, Robertson told a press conference in Wellington today. With Kiwi Bank staying in New Zealand hands, the original purpose of the bank's maintained, said Robertson, who is a Kiwi Bank customer himself. New Zealanders can continue to bank with a trusted, credible and competitive banking option that will remain fully locally owned, with all profits remaining here. Kiwibank had been accused of failing to be a serious competitor for the Australian-owned banks, and Robertson signalled the government was prepared to pump in further investment to help it grow. We obviously take seriously the importance of continuing to support Kiwibank, so yes, the government is prepared to put further capital in, he said. We understand the importance of investing more capital into this business. Obviously, like any shareholder, we will look at the proposals and the options for that as we go forward, but we recognise that this is part of our role and our responsibility. Robertson said direct ownership simplified the Crown's ability to fully support Kiwibank to meet its future potential. The certainty provides the opportunity for Kiwibank to achieve an increase in scale, efficiency and cost competitive so that it can be an even more effective competitor in the banking sector, which remains dominated by the 4 large Australian-owned banks, he said. Kiwibank Chief Executive Steve Jurkovic said the bank was making a difference in the market, citing its mortgage pricing, where he said it was often the market leader, driving behaviour and helping customers. No other bank in the history of New Zealand has made it to our size. We're a lot bigger than the other New Zealand-owned banks, but there's still a long way to go to be the 4th biggest bank, and ultimately that's our goal, to try and push through and be a really successful and impactful player, he said. Robertson said the purchase was already part of the government's borrowing program, detailed in the 2022 budget. Asked what he chose not to spend money on so that the government could buy Kiwibank, Robertson said there wasn't a particular decision taken about something that we won't do. NZ Post would pay a special dividend to the Crown, which would help offset the cost, although the size and timing would be decided by the NZ Post board, he said. Asked about the benefits to taxpayers, Robertson said New Zealanders wanted a locally owned bank where the profits remained in New Zealand. The Crown would own the business through a newly incorporated schedule for a company, Kiwi Group Capital, with a separate board, and the transaction required approval from the Reserve Bank, which is expected to take 3 to 4 months. Kiwibank and NZ Home Loans would continue to operate independently and at arm's length from the government. The NZ Super Fund will get $527 million for its share of KGH. Its chief executive, Matt Robson, called the offer fair and attractive. So a couple of observations here. We seem to be buying back what we probably originally already owned, which seems a bit weird, but I do support the idea of a national bank supported to help grow and develop banking along lines that are aligned to outcomes of customers rather than just driving profitability. So I do applaud this move if it clarifies the way forward for Kiwibank, but they do have a long way to go, and the question is, of course, will subsequent governments still continue to pump more capital in, or will it be ultimately privatised down the track? That, of course, is the fate of CBA here in Australia some years ago, and that went so well, of course, for shareholders, but not for customers. Let's hope Kiwibank doesn't go down the same rabbit hole. Meantime, let's hope that they actually do get the capital they need to grow and continue to transform banking in the interests of customers. That would be a good thing. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.